Welcome to Culture Crush with me, your host, Dan Dowman, where we get to meet some of the world's leading culture shapers, future makers, and power shakers. We'll be talking about groundbreaking cultures, leadership challenges, and what you can do about them. Today, I'm joined by the most excellent Ashley Faus. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Now, Ashley, you've been at the top of your marketing game now for some years, and now you're the head of lifestyle marketing at Atlassian. I'd love to get behind the scenes of your career a little bit, give you the opportunity to talk through how you got to that position, but also give us a sense of the scope of your current role.
So I am a marketer, writer, and speaker by day, and a singer, actor, and fitness fiend by night. That's kind of my personal and professional. I like to combine and think kind of more about work-life integration. And I think that that has been a common thread throughout my career, is really pulling in different areas of marketing and then also those different skills from, theater in particular and the public speaking and that sense of stepping into the audience's shoes. How do I feel their pain? How do I understand their problems? How do I speak like them? That's a great transferable skill from the musical theater and the performance world. So I've worked in a number of different industries, and I've always kind of been a marketing generalist. And so that ability to fall in love with any audience, I think that is the superpower in terms of how to keep growing and how to keep moving across different disciplines. So in my current role, I do a mix of content strategy. I work very closely with our product marketing teams, our demand gen teams. We've got some sales folks in there, and basically acting as that connective tissue between all of those different teams. So again, that sense of who is the audience, what are their problems, how do I speak to them in a way that resonates with them? So I get the chance to work with a lot of different specialists where our product marketers know the audience inside and out in terms of their personas, their pain points, and how our products help them. Our demand gen folks know all of the channels, the segmentation, the budgeting, all of that kind of stuff inside and out, right? They're excellent at finding where those people are spending time. What my team helps to do is translate those audience pain points, those product stories into narratives and assets for each of those channels. So we have a nice little trifecta of audience focus, assets, narratives, formats, and channels whenever we all get together and work together.
So it sounds to me that you are a bit of a natural born storyteller. That's something that you and I think, share. Although I will spare the audience and the listeners today all the edits that I'm going to have to do because I've been getting names wrong. I've been coughing and all those things that you don't get to see because storytelling is also editing from time to time. And I actually see that mirrored in some of the things you're talking about, the translation of those pain points into stories that people can connect with. You've got to come at that kind of stuff with this critical lens of deep understanding, but also a real sense of driving passion. And that driving passion is one of the reasons why we have connected. And this is such a thrill for me this is the first time we've met. This is the first conversation that we've had. But we've been having some, I would certainly categorize it as exceptionally witty banter in the comments on LinkedIn for a little while. So this feels like a really nice moment of our world colliding. I also saw recently a job that Atlassian had posted online. And I think I messaged you and I said, the values are so powerful and so clear, you almost want to make me give up on my current ambitions with Anthem and with the podcast. And I just thought I had to confess that to you in your DMs. But I found them really profound and really, really powerful. Now, with Atlassian growing so quickly year on year, I think from 23 to 24, you saw over 24% growth year on year. With any company that's growing quickly, that obviously puts strain on company culture and how values are lived and breathed within the organization. I wondered if you could just give us a sense of why those values work and why they're powerful, because they are really, really grounded and practical. But also, how do you help people kind of hold on to them when there's so much growth and change happening around you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I think I'll share what the values are first. So we have build with heart and balance. We have open company, no BS. We have don't screw the customer. In our official values, people use the F word. I personally, that's not my style on public podcasts like this. So I say a slight opposite of that. Play as a team and then be the change you seek. And there's a couple things in there. Some people will say, well, what's the most important value? And the answer is there's not one. They all work together in tandem and they all balance each other out. So when you think about be the change you seek, for example, you're empowered if you see a problem to solve it. But that also means you have to work in tandem with play as a team, because if another team is already solving that problem, you don't want to do duplicative work. You don't want to do potentially competitive work where you're off trying to solve it in one way and they're off solving it another way, and you actually end up undermining each other. It also has to think about build with heart and balance. You can't solve every single problem that you see. You have to prioritize. You'll burn yourself out. You won't have impact if you're constantly just churning through every little problem that you see, right? So those things all work together in tandem. The open company, no BS. That's another one that, particularly as we've grown, we've had to really wrestle with. What does that actually mean? Does that mean you just have license to say whatever you want, whenever you want? No. And it has never meant that. You don't get to just spout off without respect. You don't get to just, start running and attacking people. Like, that's never been the case. There's also a difference between being open and being completely transparent, right? There are some things, and we are a global company. So in some cases, this is a legal thing. In some cases, this is, a culture thing where you really actually know you can't start sharing medical details about why somebody is on leave, or you can't start sharing every single person's salary in detail, right? So being transparent and being open and that sense of how those work together is different. And as we've grown, we have had to be very intentional about talking about how do we keep those values at the forefront. And then obviously, don't screw the customer. Without the customers, we don't exist. It doesn't matter how much we like our jobs or how much, we think we've solved a problem or we've made really smart software. If it doesn't actually help our customers solve their problems and alleviate their pain points, they're not going to buy, they're not going to stay, they're not going to be empowered to actually achieve the mission that we have, which is to unleash the potential of every team. And so if we are not unleashing the potential of our customers, we are not, in fact, unleashing the potential and delivering on our mission. So it's been a really interesting thing to see. So I joined when we had around 2,000 employees. And that for me was the biggest company I had ever been at. It was 10x the size of the biggest company I had ever been at. And to watch it, basically 5x from there, it went from 2,000 to over 10,000 in my time there. It's been very important. We do a values interview as part of our hiring process. And so making sure that people are aligned in the way that they work and the way that they collaborate and approach problems. It's not that you have to think the same as everyone in terms of actual step-by-step solutions, but it really is about, are you open to feedback? Do you keep the customer at the forefront? How do you keep the customer at the forefront? When you experience challenges, how do you adapt? So having that piece right from the beginning from a hiring perspective makes a huge difference when you start to see those changes internally as the company grows.
So what is it about smaller companies, right? I, like you, have worked at many, many smaller companies. I've never been at a company where there are literally thousands and thousands of people. But so many young companies either kind of lean into values in quite a superficial way and, have some very kind of like pay lip service to the idea of values because it's a nice concept, but don't kind of really drill down into that kind of, we expect to grow and therefore we want to implement from the start really, really grounded values that make a difference. Why do you think so many founders kind of sleep on this stuff when actually it's that kind of stuff that enables growth down the line? Like if you miss it at the beginning, you'll find actually you bump into issues of toxicity quite quickly.
I think that people think that values are fluffy, and they think that org structures, team structures, ways of working, they think it's this fluffy thing. And particularly, so I live in Silicon Valley, and so I'm surrounded by very engineering-led or tech-led companies, culture, mindset. And so this idea that like they're soft skills, right? Even that name, soft skills. Well, what we really need is hard skills, right? The interesting thing is that there's actually a number of different studies. For example, Dunbar's number. So this fellow Dunbar, he has done some studies talking about how systems and processes and ways of working break at these specific inflection points when you get to a certain size of people. And so some of the numbers, I don't remember the exact waypoints, but it's like at 5 people, at 25 people, at 100 people, things start to break. And if you think about this just in your own life, it is a lot harder to get a group together for dinner if you're trying to coordinate among 5 people or 100 people. When it's 100 people, you have to start making decisions. You have to start saying, this is the date, this is the time, this is the menu, show up or don't show up, right? Versus with 5 people, you can say, oh, Dan, what day works best for you? Oh, well, this day doesn't work, but I'll pick a different day. And, oh, you've got these dietary restrictions. Okay, we'll go to a completely different restaurant, right? So you can see this in your personal life. Clearly, that's going to translate when you start scaling. There's another interesting one that's quite common in the engineering community around Conway's law. And so this is basically that the outputs of a system will reflect the constraints of that system. And so this idea of shipping your org chart, the reason sometimes that products behave in a certain way is because that's how the teams are organized internally. And so this sense, DevOps is a perfect example. Again, this is relevant to my world. Developers and operations traditionally sat separately. And this idea that developers just threw their code or threw the product over the wall, and operations was just kind of had to catch it and had to now run and troubleshoot any issues. And devs were like, ops, why aren't things always running correctly? And ops is like, well, your code's bad, right? So this concept of DevOps is to bring dev and ops closer together. There's a number of concepts in there. You build it, you run it as a core concept, which is having devs doing more of the debugging or the incident management, empowering ops to have more access to the code, and basically having a much more collaborative relationship. And that's almost like, it's called pulling a reverse Conway, where if you want a certain output, organize your teams to reflect that output, right? So I think that a lot of founders and smaller companies miss those connections to a lot of the scientific or well-studied work that's been done that says the values, the communication, the ways of working, the organizational structure, all of that has an impact on how you actually put out your offering in a way that customers can use it. It makes sense for them. It adds value to them. So I think that's why I think it's just this sense that they don't understand that it has an actual business output, not just for your teams and employee morale, but also for the outcome for those customers.
Conway's Law. I think that is so interesting. And as you were speaking, I was just thinking about how that might translate to lots of different organizations, that in the marketing, in the bad press, in the kind of how people perceive your organization, how often is that because the product people receive or the service people receive actually reflects the internal workings of the organization? You know, I'm thinking about energy companies, for example. Here in the UK, they are getting absolutely slammed for their record profits and giving money back to shareholders. And our experience as consumers of that service, you need to go, well, actually that probably reflects the way the organizations are run internally. Now, I don't want to judge. I mean, I'd love to have somebody from Shell or BP come on the show and talk about how they're arranging their company cultures. But that idea of Conway's Law is really interesting. And I think there are probably lots of places where we can see a brand show up in the world, in its marketing stories, in its services, and how often actually that reflects what's going on inside the business rather than the aims or the desires that they hope to see with the way customers engage with their products and services. A couple of other things that you mentioned that I thought were just really, really interesting. You know, be the change you want to see and play it as a team. I love how those value statements. They're about driving ownership and autonomy, but also about how they're avoiding labels. Loads of leaders will take their personality type tests. There are loads of them. And how many leaders have we met in our lives who will just say something like, I just tell it how it is, or I'm this personality type, so therefore that's my justification for why I don't always treat my team well, because I'm a cutthroat character. And people sort of kind of co-opt these labels and adopt these labels, and then they use them as permission to then treat people poorly. Whereas these kind of values, what they're actually saying is, we're not going to lean into labels. We're not going to lean into those stereotypes or those ways of self-selecting the kind of character you want to have. In fact, we're going to operate differently in a group dynamic. And I just think that's really, really powerful. Now, we've got a couple of other stops on our journey, and such a fascinating conversation so far. And we're going to talk about your culture crush in a minute and why you've selected. I think it's going to be Atlassian, and there's that's totally fine, because I think we've already justified why that would make a good topic to focus on. But we're also going to talk about a problem in culture or a problem in leadership that you've observed, and then move into talking about some practical ways that people can engage with that. But before we get there, let's hear your culture crush and tell us why Atlassian is kind of top of the tree for you today.
Yeah. So, spoiler alert, we've been talking about Atlassian. I'm going to go ahead and keep talking about Atlassian. I think that because those values are at the forefront and we do use them in hiring, that sense that I can reach out to my teammates, I can ask for help in places where maybe I'm not an expert. If there's a problem, and this is not to say that it's all Pollyanna and it's sunshine and roses all the time, right? Like, there are plenty of times where we disagree, or we have to have hard conversations about work quality or speed to market, or, dealing with some of these challenges. But the general sense that I have when I do reach out to someone, or someone reaches out to me about an issue, is that we're all on the same team actually talking about the problem. I generally feel like we are all trying to solve the problem. We all ultimately want an excellent outcome for the customer. It's not this, this cutthroat character of like, haha, I'm going to throw you under the bus so that I can get a promotion, right? Like, that sense that I'm in competition with my colleagues is not prevalent. It really is, let's hash out this issue so that we can drive a better outcome for the customer. I do also find that most of our managers try to be empathetic. They try to be human. They try to think about, how is this going to work from a team perspective? And obviously, we can't just have everyone take, 100 days of vacation every single year, because, again, that's not going to result in very good outcomes for the customer if nobody is there to do their work, right? We can't just pay everyone millions of dollars a year, because obviously that doesn't bode well for the health of the business, right? Like, we do have to still be profitable. So I think even that lens of making sure that people are paid fairly, they have good benefits, in order to keep up that morale, in order for people to feel valued, that sense of balance, I think, is more present than some companies where you've seen, just rounds after rounds after rounds of layoffs, where you've seen some of the other tactics, to slash benefits or to slash salaries. I think that Atlassian tries really hard to make sure that all of the employees feel valued, and that people feel like they understand, compensation and benefits and perks. They have managers who are evaluating them fairly, and they understand what that process is. So even just basics like that of like, I've talked with, early in my career, I didn't have a performance review. So I never really had any idea, like, how am I doing? Is there an opportunity to ask for a raise? If so, when do I do that? How do I do that? Do I just go to my manager and say, can I have a raise? It's been a year and a half. Am I doing well? Feedback is essential, right? That sense of continuous feedback. And I think that's something that we try really hard to do. We run retros. That's a big part of our culture. as well as running retro. So it's not just, giving critical feedback in the moment. It's also looking holistically at a project and saying, here's what went really well. We should do more of it. Here's areas where there was room for improvement, and how do we move forward in that way? So there's some, high level kind of mindset things and culture things. And then obviously a couple of tactical ways that shows up.
Just as you got started in that section, my mind was taken back to one of my former bosses. And they literally used to say something like this: it's my job to blow stuff up. And the way they used that term was that anytime that they were in a meeting and they were a bit bored, or anytime that, they wanted us to come up with some new ideas or some new thinking, they would just play devil's advocate, ask really provocative questions, really work hard to blow something up. Even if it's a good idea, like maybe there's a better idea, so I'm going to blow this up. And I remember once I had a conversation, and as a result, the strategy kept changing. We were constantly pivoting. We weren't giving, anything that we were trying enough time to really learn whether it was a good strategy or not. And I remember I once had a conversation with them and said, it's just not your job to blow stuff up like all the time. Sometimes it's good for us to have some calm dialogue and have some constructive conversations about what's working and what's not. Maybe have some encouraging ideation in the room, rather than this kind of like constant fear of kind of confrontation. And I get the idea, like it's not like the concept of wanting to be provocative or wanting to play devil's advocate or wanting to blow things up to practice, get a better result. In one sense, it's kind of virtuous. It's not a bad thing for you to do that, but to do it all the time and to use that as permission for your kind of constant bad behavior, that's not on. We need to be pulling in the same direction. And what I love about the way you're walking us through the Atlassian culture is this. I'm building a company called Anthem, and we've developed this model for what we're calling collective fluency, which is all about leaning into the collective intelligence of an organization, the people that you have around you. And there are three parts to this model. One is intention, things like values, purpose, mission, those kind of things. Your intentions as an organization. The second is action, behaviors, marketing, brand stories, how those intentions show up in the real world. And the final stage is outcomes. Things like how are those actions recognized by reward? How is ownership nurtured? How is a sense of autonomy celebrated? And what I loved about the example you gave about the hiring process and how you have, I think you mentioned this earlier as well, you have this values interview to actually unpack how somebody's going to engage with the intentions of the organization. Now, I just love that, because what it means is that when somebody is hired into the business, already the intentions of the organization, the values have been validated. And I imagine, just kind of fast forwarding, that when you have you mentioned being able to talk about your appraisal and being able to talk about your compensation and having open conversations about that, which aren't always easy. But when there is a culture of understanding that these conversations aren't easy, that often makes them more straightforward to have, because it's part of the culture to have that open dialogue. Now, I imagine what happens at those appraisals is that you revisit the values and you say, well, how have you been expressing our values as an organization? Or maybe there's some 360 feedback where you say, oh, Alan in operations said that you demonstrated be the change you want to see value in this way. And part of that recognition process might be what informs the pay rise or what informs the promotion. So I love how, and again, I'm sort of projecting myself into Atlassian culture here and sort of imagining how it works. But I think that's what I'm hearing. And I just love that connected process. And I love the idea of seeing things like intentions, actions, and outcomes really coming to life in super practical ways. So you, Ashley, are very much speaking my language, and I love it. But we promised we'd move on to talk about some really practical things. And I wonder if there's one or two culture challenges or leadership challenges you wanted to call out for the audience. And then why didn't you bounce straight into how people can respond to those challenges? Like, what are the practical steps they can take to make a difference when they're faced with those challenges?
Yeah, I think one of the things we actually just came out with our State of Teams report. This is an annual survey that we've done for the last couple of years, and found some really interesting stats, I think, that are particularly relevant as more and more companies are moving to remote work or hybrid work or globally distributed teams. So pulled up a couple of stats, and I think this is the biggest one in terms of, you talk about this in your model of having that collective knowledge. And so I think these stats actually dovetail really nicely with your model, where it says 55% of knowledge workers find it hard to track down information despite knowing a lot of people at their job. 50% of knowledge workers have worked on a project and only later found out that another team was working on the same thing. And then 56% of knowledge workers say that teams at their company plan and track work in different ways, which makes it really hard to collaborate. And so I think particularly for a lot of larger companies where you're not sitting in the same room, you might not be in the same time zone, how do you have that visibility and shared goals and understanding of what we're all trying to do here, right? And if we frame this in terms of the Atlassian values, it goes back to that: be the change you seek, don't screw the customer, build with heart and balance, open company, no BS, play as a team, right? Being able to actually find information, understanding how what you're working on ladders up to the goals that serve our customers, understanding how your roles and responsibilities are different than those of another team, but making sure that you collaborate and share information if you do have dependencies with each other. Like, these are huge challenges. Obviously, smaller companies have these challenges as well, but as we talked about, stuff starts to break more as you get higher on that Dunbar's number kind of scale. And so one of the things that we've actually done, which I think is super helpful, we have the Atlassian Team Playbook. This is a completely free resource. It's ungated. You don't even have to give your email address. And it basically has plays to help address these things. So, for example, doing, a goals mapping and understanding what are those goals. And then also there's another play around dependency mapping. Who else do you need to work with, and who else has dependencies to make that goal a reality? Mapping that out ahead of time instead of just like barreling forward and being like, we're going to fix this. We're going to be the change we seek and just start solving the problem, right? Okay, build with heart and balance, play as a team, take a step back, run the play to understand goals, signals, and measures, run the play to understand managing dependencies. And then when you call out those dependencies, take the action. Again, this dovetails nicely with your framework. Take the action to go speak to that other team and say, hey, looks like we're working on some things. Your team is a dependency. Do you agree? What are you working on? What are your goals, signals, and measures? Are we a dependency? Do you see us as a dependency, or are we only dependent on you? So starting to have those conversations, when you do find those dependencies, putting in place the rituals and the artifacts so that you have maybe a monthly meeting, or in our case, we use a tool called Atlas. It's one of our tools. And you can do a weekly ticket, and it's basically a tweet length update. You do have the ability to add more notes, but it's specifically meant to say, what are the big changes that happened this week on this project? And so you can add some of those folks who are dependents on you, or if you have dependencies on them, and you can follow those Atlas tickets for just a very quick and succinct understanding of where the project is at. And so that takes you all the way down from, it's just really hard to know what people are working on and to know if we have dependencies. All right, run these plays to really get a good sense of which goals you own and where you have dependencies, and then putting in place those rituals that happen weekly or monthly so that everybody can stay on the same page.
I love this because what you're talking about are organizational practices. It's not just a strategy. It's not just a process that you can implement, but there is this sense of practice that goes along with it, that you plug in this systematized approach. You try and break down the problem. You try and figure out who your dependencies are. But then there is this spirit of practice and kind of keep embedding that, keep trying it, keep leaning into the new dialogue that this approach provides. And I imagine there's always a lift, right? There's always friction when you're starting to implement a new system. But I can just imagine that over time, how this approach will reduce the friction between different teams and different people, reduce the friction in terms of your output and your organizational flow and trying to get things done. The other thing that I love, and you mentioned the Atlassian playbook, and the fact that it's not gated, I think that says so much about the culture that you want to build, the kind of service that you want to be to your customers and to other organizations. The fact that you're not using that as an opportunity to farm emails and then hit people every day with another newsletter, I think is just brilliant. So I'll make sure that we add that into the show notes so people can have a look at that and dive into all the lessons there. Now, we've covered so much ground and it's been such a fabulous conversation. And there's a lot of love between me and Atlassian in terms of our values and the ways that we want to see organizations work. But we love to land the show in something really, really practical, something really tangible for people to take away and try. Now, we may have already covered it, so feel free to kind of revisit one of your earlier points. But if you could impart one thing for people to take away and try, what would it be and why?
I would actually pull one of the first steps from the team playbook, which is the health monitor. And this is a super practical way to just start the conversation and get a sense for where the team is doing really well, where the team might have some issues. So the health monitor, again, it's a free play on the Atlassian Team Playbook. And it's got several different questions and areas. And you basically go around and it's super fast. For each question, you ask the team to give a thumbs up saying, we're good, I understand it, this is working for us. Thumb sideways, which is like, it's going okay, but I think it could be better. Or thumbs down, which is like, we're struggling here or we don't understand, right? And one of my colleagues, Don Price, who was really instrumental in helping to kind of develop the team playbook content, he talks about this as the watermelon, where everyone is like green on the outside, but then red on the inside. And so a perfect example of this, one of the questions in the health monitor is, I know who owns this project. I know who's driving it. I know who's responsible. And everyone's like, yes, I know who it is. The very next question is, great, who is it? And if everybody names a different person, you got a watermelon situation where it's like, oh, you all think you know who's in charge or who's running this project or what your roles and responsibilities are, but it turns out you're all saying different things, right? And that's a really good way to realize that maybe you don't have a documented owner or driver. You actually haven't documented the roles and responsibilities. So I would encourage folks to use the health monitor. It's a good way to just get a basic understanding of processes, ownership, roles and responsibilities, so that folks feel like they know where they're doing really well and where there's room for improvement. And then obviously on the playbook side, handily, there's a bunch of plays that are mapped to that health monitor. So that would be the first thing, is just go to the Team Playbook website, which we'll put the link in the show notes, and try out that health monitor.
And actually, I would encourage anyone who's listening who is perhaps running a smaller enterprise and you're beginning to see some growth, honestly, grab this tool and try it out. Because actually, if you can instill these kind of practices early, it's going to benefit you massively as your organization grows. You'll be able to kind of overcome those cultural crunch points that are going to come down the track. But if you can implement some of this stuff when you're growing, when you're a bit smaller, I think that's going to really, really help people. So thank you so much. And Ashley, we're done for time. The plane is on the tarmac, so to speak. And I just wanted to say, it's been so nice to meet you. I'm glad we were able to make this happen after all our banter in the LinkedIn comments. So thank you for making some time for Culture Crush.
Yeah,
let's speak
thanks
again
for having
soon.
me.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Culture Crush. If you've enjoyed your time with us, please do your thing and like and subscribe wherever you're listening from. And if you're a Culture First leader, be sure to visit anthem.ooo because we've got lots in common. See you next time.